Nice fake tattoo. The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of smug confidence that only comes from a man who has never been truly tested. It sliced through the low hum of the Naval Operations Center, a gleaming cathedral of technology where massive screens displayed global shipping lanes and satellite feeds. It was Family Day, a rare occasion when the sterile, high-stakes environment was softened by the presence of children and spouses, a PR move to show the human side of the digital fortress. The comment was aimed at a man standing quietly by a tactical display, his 10-year-old son at his side, gazing in awe at the blinking lights. The man, John Coleman, looked profoundly out of place. While the other dads were either in crisp service dress uniforms or expensive civilian attire, he wore faded bootcut jeans, a simple gray polo shirt that had seen better days, and worn leather boots. He had the quiet, slightly stooped posture of someone who had carried heavy things for a very long time, and the lines around his eyes spoke of too little sleep and too much sun. He didn't react to the jibe, not at first. He just let out a slow, controlled breath, the kind you practice until it becomes part of you, and placed a calming hand on his son, Leo's shoulder. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Peterson, a young, ambitious officer with a jawline that seemed sharper than his wits. He stood with his colleague, Ensign Gable, both of them preening for a small group of civilian guests they were escorting. They saw John as an easy target, a schlubby civilian who'd wandered into their world of precision and prestige. "Seriously, sir," Peterson pressed on, his voice louder now, drawing more attention. "Did you get that from a Cracker Jack box? Special Forces, right?" He gestured with a sneer at the small dark symbol partially visible on John's forearm. It was an intricate design, but its lines were faded, the ink blurred by years of sun and salt water. To a casual observer, it might have looked like a cheap, poorly done piece of flash art. John turned his head slowly, his eyes, a placid blue, settling on the young officer. There was no anger in them, only a deep, profound weariness. "It's just a picture," he said, his voice low and gravelly, meant for his son more than anyone else. But Leo, fiercely protective, bristled. "My dad was a soldier," the boy declared, his small voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "He's a hero!" Peterson and Gable exchanged an amused look. The performance was escalating, and they were enjoying the spotlight. "Oh, a soldier, was he?" Gable chimed in, stepping forward. He was even younger than Peterson, his face still holding a collegiate softness that hadn't yet been hardened by real responsibility. "What was your specialty, old-timer? Peeling potatoes at Fort Bragg, pushing paper at the Pentagon." The small crowd chuckled. They saw what Peterson and Gable wanted them to see, a tired, middle-aged man being put in his place by the sharp, modern Navy. They didn't see the subtle tension in John's shoulders, the way his seemingly relaxed stance was perfectly balanced, ready to move in any direction. They didn't see the hyper-awareness in his eyes, which weren't just looking at the two officers but were tracking every person in a 30-foot radius, noting exits, potential threats, and the placement of security personnel. He was a predator forced to stand still in a cage, and his stillness was being mistaken for docility. John simply squeezed his son's shoulder. "It's not important, Leo," he murmured. "These men are just enthusiastic about their service. Let's go look at the submarine models." He tried to steer his son away, to de-escalate, to simply disappear back into the anonymity he had cultivated for the last 5 years. But Peterson, high on his perceived victory, wasn't done. He stepped in their path, blocking them. "Hey, no, wait a minute. I want to hear about this hero stuff. Come on, indulge us. What great battles did you fight in? The war on Cafeteria Food?" Across the expansive command floor, Captain Eva Rostova watched the interaction with a tightening in her jaw. As the commanding officer of Naval Base Coronado, she was responsible for every soul on her station, and she did not tolerate unprofessionalism, especially not on Family Day. She had seen Peterson and Gable start their little showboating tour and had made a mental note to have a word with them about their arrogance later. Now, it seemed later had become right now. She saw the quiet man with the boy, saw his worn appearance, and sighed internally. It was probably a veteran from a different era, maybe a Gulf War Marine or an Army grunt from the 90s, and her officers were being needlessly cruel. She began to walk towards them, her polished black shoes clicking with authority on the polished concrete floor. Her intent was simple: to verbally flay 2 of her junior officers and apologize to the civilian they were harassing. Her path was direct, her purpose clear. But as she drew closer, her sharp eyes, trained to pick out minute details on satellite imagery and tactical overlays, caught a clearer view of the man's forearm as he shifted his hand on his son's back. The gray polo sleeve slid up just an inch, and for a fleeting second the tattoo was fully exposed under the cool, blue-white light of the operations center. And Captain Eva Rostova froze dead in her tracks. The world seemed to warp around her. The ambient noise of the command center, the quiet chatter, the whirring of servers, the distant ping of a sonar display faded into a dull roar in her ears. Her entire being focused on that one small patch of faded ink. It wasn't a cheap knockoff. It was a symbol she had seen only once before in her entire 25-year career. It was during a top-secret, compartmentalized intelligence briefing at the Pentagon in a soundproof room 3 levels below the ground. The briefing was about a unit so clandestine it was officially designated as a myth, a piece of disinformation to confuse enemy intelligence. They were a ghost unit, a scalpel used for operations that couldn't be traced back to the United States government. The slide had been on the screen for less than 10 seconds, and the briefer, a 4-star admiral with eyes that looked like chipped granite, had spoken its name in a near whisper. Task Force Aegis. The Sentinels. The symbol was their unofficial marker, a tattoo given only to the handful of operators who survived the selection process and their first 5 missions. It was a coiled serpent eating its own tail, the Ouroboros, representing eternity and secrecy. Inside the circle, a spectral, jawless skull was pierced by a downward-pointing trident. Rostova felt a cold sweat prickle her neck. The trident for the SEALs. The skull for the missions they undertook in the shadow of death. The serpent for the fact that they did not exist. They were ghosts. And one of them was standing right here, in her command center, being mocked by a pair of ignorant lieutenants. A wave of something akin to vertigo washed over Rostova. She looked at John Coleman again, but now she was seeing him through an entirely new filter. The faded clothes weren't a sign of poverty. They were camouflage, a deliberate choice to be unnoticeable, to be the gray man in the crowd. The tired lines around his eyes weren't just from being a single dad. They were etched there by things she could barely imagine, by sleepless nights spent in frozen mountains and humid jungles, by the weight of decisions that meant life or death for his team and for national security. His quietness wasn't weakness. It was an iron discipline forged in crucibles of unimaginable pressure. He wasn't stooped from age, he was coiled, his body a weapon held in reserve, every muscle fiber humming with a latent energy that was terrifying to comprehend. She then looked at Peterson and Gable, her own officers, and a hot, sickening shame flooded her chest. They were children, playing with matches in a room filled with explosives. They weren't just being disrespectful to a veteran. They were desecrating a living monument to a level of sacrifice and courage that they couldn't possibly fathom. They were standing on hallowed ground and spitting on it because they were too blind and arrogant to recognize its sanctity. Her duty, her entire sense of honor, shifted in that instant. This was no longer about discipline. This was about restoring a cosmic balance, about rectifying an injustice so profound it felt like a physical weight in the room. Her stride, when she resumed it, was different. It was no longer the brisk walk of a commander. It was the deliberate, measured pace of someone approaching royalty or a ticking bomb. The small crowd parted before her, sensing the immense shift in atmosphere. Peterson and Gable saw her coming, and their smug expressions faltered, replaced by a flicker of apprehension. They snapped to attention as she arrived. "Captain!" Peterson barked out, trying to appear professional. Rostova's eyes, a steely gray, didn't even glance at them. They were fixed on John Coleman. She saw the way he subtly shifted his body, placing himself slightly between her and his son, a protective instinct so ingrained it was like breathing. He was assessing her, too. He didn't see a captain. He saw a potential new variable in a tense situation. "Lieutenant Peterson, Ensign Gable." Rostova's voice was low, but it cut through the air like shrapnel. "You will remain at attention. You will not move, and you will not speak a single word until I address you directly. Is that understood?" The sheer venom in her tone shocked them into rigid statues. "Yes, ma'am," they whispered in unison, their faces paling. She then turned her full attention to John, her expression softening into one of deep, undisguised reverence. The entire room held its breath, confused by the bizarre turn of events. "Sir?" Captain Rostova said, and the use of that single word, delivered with such deference from a full-bird captain to a man in a faded polo shirt, sent a shock-wave through the onlookers. "On behalf of my command and the United States Navy, I want to offer my deepest, most sincere apology for the unforgivable ignorance and disrespect my officers have shown you." Peterson and Gable looked as if they had been struck by lightning. Their minds struggled to compute what was happening. Why was their CO apologizing to this nobody? Rostova didn't wait for a response. She looked pointedly at John's forearm, at the tattoo that had started it all. Her voice dropped even lower, becoming almost a conspiratorial whisper, yet every person in the silent room heard it clearly. "I recognize that marking, sir. I was part of a limited intelligence sharing program at the Pentagon a few years back." She paused, then delivered the payload, a string of words that were meaningless to everyone else but were a key turning a lock between her and him. The briefing concerned Operation Nightfall Serpent, the Zagros Mountains, 2011. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a sign of recognition between two people who understood the secret geography of the hidden world. It was a test, a way of saying, "I know who you are." For the first time since the confrontation began, John Coleman's mask of weary indifference slipped. His placid blue eyes sharpened, focusing on Captain Rostova with an intensity that was almost physical. He saw her, not as an officer but as someone who had peeked behind the curtain. The briefest flicker of a shared, terrible knowledge passed between them. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the confirmation she needed. For a split second, John wasn't in the command center anymore. He was back there, on that windswept ridge in the Zagros Range, the air thin and burning cold in his lungs. The metallic taste of blood was in his mouth. He could feel the crushing weight of his brother in arms, Danny, draped over his shoulders, and he could hear the ragged, wet sound of his friend's final breaths near his ear. He remembered activating a single-use infrared beacon, its light invisible to the naked eye, and seeing that same spectral skull symbol on his gear, a grim reminder of the pact they had all made. They were ghosts, and ghosts don't leave their own behind. He blinked, the memory receding like a painful tide, leaving behind the familiar ache of loss. He looked down at his son, Leo, who was staring up at him, his young face a canvas of confusion, fear, and a dawning, incredible pride. The boy knew something profound was happening, something that would change the way he saw his quiet, unassuming father forever. With the silent confirmation received, Captain Rostova pivoted back to her petrified junior officers. The warmth and reverence in her voice vanished, replaced by a glacial fury that made the air itself seem to crackle. "This man," she began, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell, each word a hammer blow. The man whose service you felt entitled to mock is Senior Chief Petty Officer John Coleman, retired. She let his rank hang in the air for a moment. Senior Chief. A legend in the SEAL teams. A rank achieved by only the most grizzled, respected, and capable operators. He is the recipient of the Navy Cross. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor. He also holds 3 silver stars and 5 bronze stars, all with the V for Valor. The list of accolades was staggering, utterly incomprehensible. Peterson's knees looked weak. Gable seemed to be shrinking inside his perfectly pressed uniform. "The tattoo you so bravely called fake," Rostova continued, her voice dripping with contempt, "is the marker for a Tier 1 special mission unit so classified. Its budget is hidden inside black projects at the Department of Energy, a unit whose existence is denied by our own government. The reason you have never heard of him, Lieutenant, is because men like Senior Chief Coleman bleed in the darkness so that you can stand here safely in the light and enjoy the luxury of your own ignorance." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, in a move that defied all protocol and stunned every single person present, Captain Eva Rostova, a decorated 06 and the commander of a major naval installation, faced John Coleman, snapped her heels together with a sound like a rifle shot, and rendered the sharpest, most heartfelt salute of her entire life. Her hand quivered almost imperceptibly at her brow. "Senior Chief," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "it is an honor to have you on my base." As if a switch had been flipped, every other person in uniform in that vast room, from the young seaman apprentice monitoring a comms channel to the grizzled commander overseeing fleet movements, turned as one and followed their captain's lead. A forest of arms snapped up in salute, a silent, powerful wave of respect washing over the quiet man in the faded polo shirt. It was a spontaneous, overwhelming tribute. Peterson and Gable, trapped in the center of it all, shakily brought their own hands up, their faces ghostly white with the horrifying, soul-crushing weight of their shame. They were saluting the very man they had tried to humiliate, their arrogance exposed and incinerated in the blaze of his silent, hidden glory. John Coleman didn't smile or gloat. He simply placed his right hand over his heart, a humble gesture of acknowledgement, and gave a small, respectful nod to Captain Rostova. It was a moment of profound connection, a quiet understanding between two warriors who had served under the same flag, albeit in vastly different worlds. He then knelt, bringing himself down to eye level with his son. Leo's eyes were shining with tears and awe as he looked at his father, who was no longer just Dad, but something more, something mythic. "See, buddy?" John whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I told you. It's just a little picture." He gave his son a small wink, grounding the celestial moment in a simple act of fatherly love. Captain Rostova gave Peterson and Gable a final, withering glare that promised a reckoning of biblical proportions, then walked over to John and Leo. Her demeanor was gentle now, all traces of the furious commander gone. "Senior Chief," she said softly, "my XO is a former submariner. Would your son like a personal tour of the attack submarine simulator? The real one, not the display model." A genuine, warm smile finally broke through John's stoic facade, transforming his tired face. "He'd love that," he said. "Thank you, Captain. Thank you for everything." In the quiet dignity of that exchange, true honor was restored, not with a bang, but with a quiet gesture of kindness, proving that the deepest respect is not demanded by rank or uniform, but earned in the silent, unseen sacrifices made far from the light.